Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to spend the entirety of the show going over analyzing the Prime Minister's interview and statements in the Global Armenian Summit, and put that in the context of the 4th anniversary of the war of aggression against Artsakh and Armenia.
I repeat, the Republic of Armenia recognizes the territorial integrity of all countries in the region. Armenia does not have territorial claims against any country. Indeed, some of our territories are occupied, more than 200 square kilometers, but I would like to say that the government of Armenia doesn't have an objective of returning those territories militarily. Because we believe that the regulation signed with Azerbaijan regarding the joint activity of the Border Delimitation Commission allows us and makes it possible to return those territories through negotiations during the delimitation process.
In short, nothing is going to be returned via the demarcation process, which at this point has essentially stopped functioning because of lack of cooperation and goodwill from the other side. The reality is what is lost by force will only be taken back by force. I'm not even sure if the Prime Minister actually believes what he is saying at this point, but given the current balance of power between the two countries, I understand why he's saying it and why he's holding to this line.
The topic of prisoners, hostages, and other detained individuals. I think it is the peace treaty itself that should resolve this issue. Regardless whether this is literally written there, the peace treaty means a different atmosphere, a different relationship. We are saying that 80% of the peace treaty is agreed upon. We are saying let's sign what we have agreed upon and then deal with the rest that hasn't been agreed upon yet. And we are hearing an opinion saying, no, this treaty won't be signed until all articles aren't agreed upon. But excuse me, how many articles should this treaty have? One of the parties can say there is another article we should agree this to, and we could agree it, and it could turn out there is another one that must be agreed upon. Meaning it's not written anywhere that the peace treaty must have, let's say, 25 articles and can't have 17 or 15, 14, or 13 articles. The problem here is about political will.
No, it won't. First of all, nothing's going to be signed, and I think the Prime Minister actually knows that. More importantly, not including the release of all the hostages and POWs as part of the negotiating process has been a dramatic mistake, and it's actually given the other side another opportunity to blackmail this country. POWs will only be released when this government is willing to use a stick and attack the regime on holding these people unnecessarily and make them pay a political price for it.
Will Armenia participate in the COP29 conference?
We still don't have a decision on that issue.
This is actually a simple one. If whoever goes from Armenia is going to come back with all the POWs and hostages, then absolutely go. If you're not going to come back with all the POWs and hostages, there's really not much to think about.
Մենք քաղաքական անվտանգության պայմանագրի կազմակերպությունում մեր անդամությունը սառեցրել ենք.
We have frozen our membership to the CSTO, not only because the CSTO doesn't ensure its security obligations towards Armenia, but also because, in our opinion, the CSTO creates threats for Armenia's security and Armenia's future existence, sovereignty, and statehood. 2 years have passed since we made these arguments, and not only were there no answers, but it is obvious that there will be no answers at all. Even if it is not obvious, I can say that the more no answers are heard, the more Armenia is distancing itself from the CSTO with every minute and second. And there is an expression, the point of no return. And if we haven't crossed it, then there's big likelihood that we will. And no one will have any legitimate occasion or reason to blame us for it.
He's absolutely correct about the need to walk away from the CSTO. And we've covered the reasons for it and the betrayals of the CSTO for countless times on this broadcast. However, I'm not sure if the CSTO is a danger to this country anymore because it was a danger when it was actually preventing us from buying Western weapons because of our ties to the CSTO, but that's been pretty much lifted. At this point, CSTO is more useless than anything. It's not particularly a danger to this country.
It
is no secret that after my statement, this issue has become an integral part of the political agenda in Armenia, whether or not Armenia should officially adopt a trajectory of joining the EU. But we must understand that this is not a one-way action, and it's not even a bilateral one. This is where we should be very attentive in wording the objectives in order not to cause new disappointment among our people on the path of solving those objectives. We should also physically imagine Armenia's membership to the EU. The Georgia-EU ties are highly important here. The development of Turkey-EU ties are highly important too. And in this context, it is very important how the Armenia-Turkey relations will develop. Armenia's strategic choice of adopting democracy will bring the country closer to the EU and the US and other Western partners. But on the other hand, we must not contradict our democracy with our regional policy. Our future actions regarding the EU must be transparent. Moreover, the intentions of our EU partners must be transparent, and so on. Basically, I cannot rule out that if we see a more or less realistic chance of becoming a full member of the EU, including by keeping the possible threats that could emerge on that path manageable, we won't miss the moment.
In this case, his tone and messaging was actually exactly correct, and it was presented in the right way. Because first of all, it shows intention and it shows the direction that you want to go to without promising things that are not realistic. In reality, we have no idea if this is a possibility because so much of it actually depends on, it's not even about Armenia, it's about the internal politics of the EU, actually the crises within the EU. So if the historic opportunity ever comes, yes, indeed, he's correct. We should jump at it. That's not an issue. However, the more realistic thing is you have to get ready and you have to prepare yourself on multiple different fronts. What is the rule of law, having a stable democracy, raising the standards of the products that you produce, to be even in a position to actually apply for membership if the opportunity ever comes. But however, all of those things are good things in and of themselves. So as you're moving towards this process of getting to actually apply, even if that moment never comes, is actually something that's going to be quite beneficial to this country.
I will tell you as I tell my family, the biggest problem we had was our perception of patriotism. Moreover, there is no irony or sarcasm in what I am saying. The biggest issue I faced was my patriotism, with the perception that this model of patriotism had nothing to do with our homeland. It is simply an imperial model of patriotism which was introduced into our social psychology through books, films, texts, speeches, characters, and images. I'm talking about the outpost. I understand that many people think, that others made us an outpost. No, we have made ourselves an outpost by believing this is not a country meant to provide welfare to its citizens, but rather a base through which we should reach other goals. Others saw fertile ground and planted seeds to reap the fruits they needed, must recognize the destructive aspect of our patriotism for ourselves. It would be in the best interest of the Republic of Armenia if I were not a patriot. That is the greatest harm I have caused my love for my country and my people. However, the main problem is that neither you nor I are the authors of that love. It is an imperial love shaped by the empire instilled in us.
There's many things that he says that I disagree with, but I'm going to start with what he's making a valid point. Where he's making a valid point is that there's a difference between a national project and a state. The state has its very specific jobs and tasks at hand, and it is not the job of the Armenian state to establish universal justice or historical justice, and this is something that's actually missed by many diasporans, especially. However, when I was listening to this portion of the speech, the first question that came to mind is, would he actually be making this speech if we had actually won the war in 2020? And the answer to that is clearly no, which means that what this is actually not some great political insight or some question or principle that he's reached over time thinking about it. This actually has a lot more to do with our particular current situation, i.e. the position of weakness that we're in. And more importantly, from a political standpoint, this is just to absolve himself for many of the disasters of the past 4 years.
There's been a very important decision recently. The EU, the European Peace Facility, provided assistance to Armenia, which is symbolic in financial and technical terms, but has huge significance. We are carrying out military technical cooperation with various countries. And we are also creating a professional army. You know what's interesting? They say the West is arming Armenia. Excuse me, but Azerbaijan is buying weapons from the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Italy. since when aren't these countries the West? Why can Azerbaijan buy weapons from Italy, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and Armenia can't buy weapons from France? Why can Azerbaijan buy weapons from Pakistan and Armenia can't do so from India? We are saying that our objective is the protection of our 29,743 square kilometer sovereign territory, a right that is guaranteed by the UN Charter. Furthermore, the documents of the UN and other international organizations oblige the state to ensure the security of its citizens, and we will fulfill these obligations.
He is 100% correct in this case. These objections by the regime in Baku are actually entirely ridiculous and actually say a lot about their actual intentions. More importantly, it denotes what they fear the most. An Armenia that can defend itself is an Armenia that can say no, and they will move heaven and earth for us not to get there.
Ինչի համար է եւ ինչ գործառույթ ունի Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը?
The conceptual alternative that is under discussion in our country today is the following. What is the Republic of Armenia for? An outpost? A point of support? For having a bigger state with bigger territory? Or as a mechanism to ensure the prosperity of its own citizens on its internationally recognized territory with the perception that a good life, freedom, justice, and security are integral elements of prosperity? The Armenian people have chosen the real Armenia long ago. But we, the leaders throughout various times, didn't listen to them and basically forced our people to live in the historical cycle. This is why we should apologize to our people, and I hereby make my share of apology.
Much to unpack here. Let's go back in time. Look at this picture here. Is this leaders pushing us to live in historical cycles, or the people demanding a struggle of national liberation from their leaders? Let's watch a more recent video.
Եկեք պայմանավորվենք մի բան։ Ինչ էլ լինի, մենք մեզ երբեք պարտված չենք ճանաչում։
Let's agree that, no matter what happens, we will never admit defeat. And no matter what happens, we will not stop moving forward. We will not stop fighting for our national victory. For the victory of Armenia. For the victory of Artsakh. For the victory of the Armenian people.
Հանուն Մոնթեի հաղթանակի, հանուն Վազգեն Սարգսյանի հաղթանակի.
So were Monte Melkonian and Vazgen Sarkisian leaders that were forcing our people to live in historical cycles and not in the real Armenia? Or were there leaders who gave their lives to make sure that we are no longer the victims of historical cycles? And stepping back and trying to analyze all of this, this messaging that you get from the Prime Minister is actually part of a very consistent, for a lack of a better phrase, anti-nationalist, or what they would call a realism discourse, or at least that's what his supporters would say. In reality, this has very little to do with realism, but the normalization of humiliation as state policy. A humiliation that, by the way, in all fairness, the current government is not even entirely responsible for. Obviously, the 800-pound gorilla in all of the things that he's saying is about Artsakh and the loss of Artsakh last year. What he does not dare to say, but what he's implying, is that the loss of Artsakh is the price that this country had to pay for independent, affluent, functional Armenia, and in figurative terms, to cut the Russian hands off of Armenia. That's the price that you need to pay, which in this case, for his own purposes, is quite self-serving, since he actually bears a significant amount of responsibility for the events of last year and the ethnic cleansing there. More importantly, his presupposition is actually disproved by the facts, i.e. everything that has happened since November 9th of 2020 to today. Simply put, Armenia, without Artsakh as a buffer, is a country with genocide borders. The real lesson of the last 4 years, in fact, you can say for the last 30 years, is that we are not a country that has a right to lose wars or be in any way weaker militarily than our existential enemies. In conclusion, I just want to note that we're actually going to be taking a 2-3 week absence, and I'll be back by late October to restart the show. In concluding on this topic, let us be clear about one thing when it comes to the Artsakh struggle, what it was, and to be honest with you, still is. It was never about imperial ambition. It was about the Armenian state the Armenian people and the collective nation, saying that what happened to our people in 1915 will never be allowed to happen again. We succeeded in saying that in the early 1990s, and we failed in this decade. The defeat or failure in no way makes that fight or struggle less just or less righteous. The fight was legitimate in 1994. It was legitimate in 2020, as much as it will be legitimate in 2040. More importantly, the hallowed ground of the struggle and the heroes that it produced is not a playground for political operatives justifying their failures or those seeking power. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Insights.
One way to be a first-class citizen. There's only one way to be independent. There's only one way to be free. It's not something that someone gives to you. It's something that you take. Nobody can give you independence. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality or justice or anything. If you're a man, you take it. If you can't take it, you don't deserve it.